Hello everyone, this is the 4th episode of videos about my life. Now, if you haven't watched the previous 3, then it might be an idea to watch them in order and go through this playlist. Then you will start to realise why this woman in front of you now made so many errors over the years. Hopefully, you won't make them as well. But if you have been watching them, then stick around and you'll find out what happened next. In the last video, I was just about to be introduced to a man who had been widowed the previous year by my friend who had met him and knew him from her church. She did introduce me to him, and he seemed terribly nice. He had 2 boys, younger than 10, who were, in general, being looked after by a childminder during the day and a lot of evenings as well. I think that it is in my nature to be a rescuer. I think that's been my problem. I see somebody who is suffering, or I see somebody who is in need, and I want to help. And sometimes it would pay me to take a step back and not dive in, but here we go. We were introduced. He seemed very nice. And he had been telling me that he played squash. And I said that I didn't know how to play squash. He invited me to his squash club the following Friday. And I said I would like to learn how to play. So he sent me through the post a little notebook that told you the rules of squash. And with it came a note that said, hopefully more comprehensible. And there was a little X. And I thought, there's a kiss. I was so clearly easily pleased. Anyway, we had that date. We got on well, or I think we got on well. And we just carried on dating for quite a while. And then eventually I moved in with him. I still had my flat. I didn't rent it out. I moved in with him. And that suited him well because I took over the day-to-day running of his household. I looked after the children, the 2 boys. I did all the washing, all the ironing, all the cleaning, kept house. I think throughout my years, I have always felt the need to be of value to people, to earn my way. So I did. I was extremely valuable to him. I did everything. It soon came to the point where he was saying things like, when we're married. And at the time I thought, well, he hasn't asked me, but I do like somebody who knows what they want and is positive about things. So I didn't say anything about that. I just thought, well, if it happens, it happens, because I know I can be good for him. I didn't actually think, could you be good for me? That didn't come into it. I can see you're thinking there's a pattern here. And there was. When I think about it now, it just is what got me into trouble so many times. We were happily going along. Then he said, well, we might as well get married. That was a fabulous proposal, wasn't it? And we did. We got married and I became his wife. Now, I can tell you, I embarked on that marriage never ever wanting to get divorced again, ever. The thought of ever being divorced again was so horrendous that I put in so much work to not make that happen. I think I became a Stepford Wife, one of those. And I literally did this. I would get up early in the morning. I would stand at the window. I would wave at him as he passed the house because he'd already had to go up the end of the road to turn around to get back down again. So I would wait there until he passed. He'd look up at the window and he would see me waving. I thought that was a nice thing to do. I constantly tried to find nice things to do for him that he would appreciate how much I appreciated him. I loved him. I would leave little notes in his pocket, or in his shirt pocket, or in his diary, or in his briefcase. I would leave little love notes in his suitcase if he went abroad. Things like that. When you come across something like that, it gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. And I wanted him to feel that. I wanted to feel it myself, but it didn't happen. I think you shouldn't do something for somebody else hoping that they cotton on that you'd really like to have it done yourself, because it never works. That said, I still did it. I did all these things and all these little treats and all these little efforts that went on in the background. And I'd say, "Did you get your note?" He'd say, "Yes, thank you." So we carried on in that vein. It did feel on the surface like it was a happy marriage. And very soon he said, "Why don't we have a child together?" And I thought, okay, I can do that. I'd already had 4 children. And I didn't have my children with me. They were, I think, being held hostage by my first husband, who was very, very controlling and felt that his children would be weaponized against me. It does go on. It does. So I thought, yes, okay. So I became pregnant with Katie. And she was born. And she was such a good little baby. Never any trouble. Not a temper tantrum type baby. Not grizzly. She was a little dream baby. And I think the first inkling, you're going to think, oh my goodness, no, not again. I think the first inkling or sense of dread that I had was when Katie was about 4 or 5 months old. And it was the 9th of December. And I had been cleaning the boys' bedroom, which was in the loft conversion at the top of the house. I'd finished, and foolishly, I'd come down those stairs with socks on. And I had slipped on the staircase and bumped all the way down on my bottom, breaking my coccyx. Now, if you've ever broken your coccyx, you will know just how painful that is. It is for such a small bone. It is hideously painful. It stops you from sitting down, for sure. It stops you from lying down with a pillow under your head, because that in fact does put pressure on that area. And it does that for about 6 weeks. So having fallen down the stairs, I shuffled, and I forgot to tell you, I held on to the vacuum cleaner for grim death. I didn't want it to break, so there was nothing wrong with the vacuum cleaner. I got up from the stairs and I shuffled my way to our bedroom and lay on my front, face down, with my legs hanging off the bed. And I was there for an hour. And at some point I needed to use the bathroom. Now, each time I tried to move myself off the bed, the pain was excruciating. And I thought, I need some help. So I called out to him. And he came upstairs and he asked me what was going on. He berated me for deliberately falling down the stairs. I hadn't. And, well, he was absolutely furious because it was clear that he might have to have a few days off work to look after Katie. So he was still telling me off as he helped me shuffle to the bathroom. And at the point where I went to sit down, the pain of it caused me to black out and I passed out on the floor. The next thing I remember is him calling my name, clearly panicked, and telling me to get up, and lifting me. So anyway, I managed to go to the loo. I shuffled my way back again, and he went back downstairs, and he arranged to have a few days off work to look after our baby, because it was clear I couldn't do anything. He was not a happy bunny, shall we say. So that was one thing. I don't really know exactly at what point I started to notice things weren't right. It was probably at the point after I'd fallen down the stairs, but things carried on and I put it to the back of my mind. I did notice that he would often come back from the office in the evening. He would get back at about 7:30, sometimes 8. He would leave early in the morning. He worked in the centre of London. He had a very powerful job. And I would greet him at the door and he'd stand there, a briefcase in hand, not putting the thing down. And I would greet him at the door with a hug and a kiss, and I'd take the briefcase from him, put it on the floor. And at times I used to think, gosh, you've turned into a Stepford Wife. But I didn't mind. I thought that's what he wanted. So I did. Aside of leaving all these little notes, and I just wanted him to feel loved and cherished. But you know, if you need to feel loved and cherished, and you are non-verbally telling somebody this is how I want to be treated. I think women do this, we treat men how we, initially anyway, how we want to be treated. All the little notes and all the little surprises. But some men, are just tone deaf. They don't listen and they don't hear and they don't see. So if you actually need something, you should say. Verbalize it. Say it. This is what I need. Instead of doing it all and hoping they read between the lines. So this carried on. Sometimes he would come home from work and he, for some reason, wouldn't want to talk to me. I kiss him and then he in England we have a saying, he sent you to Coventry, which means, he didn't talk to you. And he would send me to Coventry. He wouldn't talk to me all weekend, from that Friday, all through the Saturday. One day, during the summer months, I can remember my father and stepmother were coming for Sunday lunch. And the atmosphere in the house was horrendous. He hadn't talked to me all weekend, not even when we went to bed, nothing. And I was at a loss. I wasn't going to ask him because, I knew I hadn't done anything. I was doing exactly the same thing as I did every other day. So, my parents arrived and my father said, "Have you two had a row?" And I said, "No, I don't know what's the matter with him. But no, we haven't had a row. In fact, he said nothing to me since Friday. So, no." We had lunch, my parents left early. And then, for some reason, he got a call from somebody in the office on a Sunday. And he'd gone out into the garden, he was faffing around out there doing something. And I said, "There's a phone call for you." He came in, he picks up the phone, and he does this. "Hi, yes, oh yeah, oh, blah, 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 oh, ha, ha, ha." And I wasn't in the same room, but I could hear him. And I thought, what on earth is going on? Why has he sent me to Coventry? Now, I've explained in the other videos, I was conflict averse. I would do everything not to rock the boat. So I didn't say anything. I mean, me now, I would have said, "What's going on?" I would have called him out on the Friday, never mind on the Sunday. But I didn't then. I didn't have the confidence. I was too mousy. I was just too fearful, really. So that was one time. And that repeated often, actually. Various moods, for no reason. Another time, and this was a horrible time, we'd gone to bed, we were both tired. I put my hand on his chest, just, as a, "I'm here, I love you, sleep well." And he grabbed hold of my hand so roughly and tightly and shoved it and twisted it away from him. And I was shocked and it was painful. I thought at one point he'd broken my wrist. And I thought, what on earth is wrong? What have I done? You know, it wasn't like I was initiating anything, that way inclined. It wasn't that kind of touch. But it was so violent an action that I lay in bed and I cried quietly. That was horrible. I decided that I needed therapy. I wanted to not need to be loved. And if I could achieve that, then I would be able to remain married. So I went and I found myself a Gestalt therapist, and I would go to her once a week, bearing my soul, sometimes not saying much. And I would often wonder if she would ever intervene. And I did ask her once, how long are you going to let me sit here saying nothing? And she said, well, the silence enables you to think through your thoughts. And I thought, well, I could do that on my own, in my own room, without you sitting in front of me. But there you go. I did carry it on for 18 months. And at the end of it, I was no further forward. I still wanted to be loved. It was a waste of time, really. But after that, I did write to my father because, I wrote to him because I had things to say about my childhood. And I wrote this long letter, and he replied, "This has all the ramblings of a psychiatrist's couch," which actually was true. But nevertheless, they were my ramblings. And so I didn't talk to him for ages. That said, things carried on. I would have these intermittent talks with my husband, pleading. I think it was pleading for him to be nice. I can remember saying to him, I'm not even asking for love now. I'm asking you just to be polite. Can you do that? I'm not asking you to love me, but just be polite. I can actually remember having that conversation as we walked around Kew Gardens, me beseeching him to just be polite. And of course he would say, I will, I've been very busy at work and blah, blah, blah. Then the next day he would come home with flowers from the garage forecourt. The man obviously had style. And for a while, he would make a little bit of an effort. I mean, at least he was polite. And then I decided I needed something more. And I had started working as a volunteer at a hospice nearby. I started working there twice a week, assisting a hairdresser, holding the rollers, holding the scissors, passing them, washing their hair, just trying to make people feel a bit better. And then one day somebody said to me, can you cut my toenails? Because they're ever so long and the nurses aren't allowed to do them. So I said, yes, of course. I'll have to go and buy some scissors because the hairdresser won't like me using hers for your toes. I'll get them, and when I come back next week, I'll have them and do your toes. Well, I did go and buy some clippers. I bought an emery board, I bought a foot file, I bought some cream, and the following week I went back and there were 8 people that needed their nails trimmed. So I did that, and then that was my thing. I was no longer an assistant hairdresser or an assistant to the hairdresser. I was the lady who cut nails. And I did that, and they'd put their feet up on my lap, and I'd have a towel there, and then I would cut their nails and then throw the clippings and the towel in the bin. It was a paper towel. Then one day, one dear old gentleman asked me to cut his nails. His nails weren't terribly thick, so they were easy, but they were covered in this, what I now know was a fungus infection, but I didn't at the time. And I was looking at them thinking, I can make them actually look a little bit better. I will use my emery board on them and buff away all of the marks that were fungus. And so I was doing that, and gradually they were falling off. Now, I know now that it was a condition called onycholysis, but I didn't then. I just thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So, I mean, they weren't bloody underneath, they were spontaneously lifting. So, I did all of his nails. Most of them fell off into my lap. I bundled them up in the piece of paper and I popped them in the bin. When I got home that night, I said to my husband, do you know what happened to me today? And I retold my story, and I said, if that doesn't put me off, then I don't think anything will. I think I will go and do a course on chiropody. Katie was less than a year old, so we got a childminder for twice a week when I could take her to the childminder, and then I could go home and study. This course was at the Smay Institute in Maidenhead, and the theory was done by post, not online. I know it's done online these days, but in those days it wasn't. It was, you got your papers, you did all your studying, you wrote out all the answers to the questions they gave you, and then you popped it into the post, and it took a week or 2 to come back again with a new lesson. So I hadn't been in education for such a long time. I found it, and clearly I still do find learning things, but worse so these days. I found it quite difficult. There is so much to learn when you want to become a chiropodist, and even more so if you want a degree. But I did have to learn all the insertions, everything about all the muscles of the foot, of the lower limb, etc., all the venous circulatory system, the arterial circulatory system, all the medicaments, what to do for this, what to do for that. I mean, it did take a full year of study. And at the end of that year, then you had to go to the Smay Institute for a 6-hour exam. And I did that, and I passed. Tick. Then I had a 2-week practical course. That was very enjoyable, albeit they didn't give you a sharp disposable scalpel. You had to have a scalpel that you sharpened yourself, which was archaic, and I think designed to make you look inept, and it succeeded. But once I'd completed that, then I was fit to go. So I started a mobile chiropody service. And at one point, I was working on and off 7 days a week. Not back-to-back patients because, it wasn't a surgery. Plus, you had to drive everywhere. But I did have an awful lot of patients. And I was bringing in the money. I had a profession for the first time in my life. And that made me feel like I was someone. I had a profession. I wasn't just, a nothing like I felt I was. I had a profession. Then I got a surgery. I found a place to rent. We did it up. And I had 2 surgeries there, one with alternative therapies in the other surgery. And then this one that I was in was just me working there. And I had an assistant who took all the phone calls. And, I was earning a lot of money. And it did my self-esteem no end of good. I'm recollecting my second marriage. My mind tends to wander and things pop into my brain randomly. I can remember that when Katie was only a few months old and she had the measles, mumps and rubella triple vaccine, she had a very bad reaction to it. I took her to the doctor as this bouncing bundle of pink confection. And a few hours later, she was limp, quietly whimpering, hot, and I was panicked. I thought that she could die, having gone through the death of Christopher. It was a Friday. I'd phoned the doctor. He said, cool her down, which I was trying to do. But it was Friday, and Friday was for squash. And I told my husband, I'm not going out. I don't want to go out. Katie is unwell. He couldn't understand it. When I insisted that I wasn't going to go out, I couldn't leave her, he said, and this is verbatim, well, if she dies, she dies. She's had a nice life. You can't do any more than that. Now, this was his own daughter, this gorgeous little creature, and he dismissed her like that. I think at that point, I realized that this man was something else. In fact, in the dying throes of our marriage, when my husband decided that I needed sorting out by a marriage counsellor, so he got a male one to have that male bonding, I suspect. I mentioned him saying that about our daughter, and the reaction from the therapist was, "Ah!" And my husband sat there and justified what he had said. Well, it's true. If she died, she died. There would be nothing I could do about it. Now, I have just recently told Katie about this, just in case I mentioned it in this video, because I wouldn't say anything on these videos that my children didn't know already. I wouldn't want them to find out about their father's behaviour. When I did tell Katie what her dad had said, she burst out laughing. And I said, that wasn't the reaction that I thought you would have. And she said, well, you know, I don't expect anything more of him. And I suppose she shouldn't, because he has not been in touch with her since university, and now she's 35. He doesn't know he's got grandchildren. He doesn't know that she's got severe health issues. He has essentially abandoned her. So it's, I suppose, not surprising she would expect nothing less of him. But that's what he said. We had embarked on marriage guidance counselling, and that was going nowhere. It was actually too little, way too late. I had been begging him for signs of affection, then, well, actually love first, then affection, and then just be polite, over a number of years. And having gone through the therapy and been unsuccessful in being able to stay and not need anything from your husband, it didn't work. I was just treading water, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do, where to go, what to do. You know, I just was in a terrible pickle. I had my business at our home, and I was earning a lot of money from that. And, you know, we were living together, but we might as well have been complete strangers. Complete strangers. I had stopped doing all the notes. I mean, clearly they never worked. I had stopped all that Stepford Wife stuff. That didn't work either. I'd given up, I suppose. I'd thrown in the towel and was just treading water, going through the process of a day, looking after the children, cleaning the house, working. Then one day, somebody I went out with briefly when I was single came to my surgery. And this I do regret. I made an error of judgment. he sat there in my chair, my podiatry chair, and he told me, because I finished with him when I was single, not because he was impotent, that didn't bother me, and he was. He was just so unreliable, and actually a little bit tight-fisted, which I'm not. I mean, being mean is like having bad BO. It's just so abhorrent. Anyway, he came into my surgery. Now, bearing in mind, I had forgotten about all this, why I didn't go out with him in the first place for long. I was sitting there and he said, you know, I've never stopped loving you. Well, that was news because he never told me before. And when I listened to Whitney Houston's record, I Will Always Love You, I think of you. And I thought, oh, how easily I was swayed. I was stupid. And this went on for weeks, he coming to my surgery. I think he had a verruca or something, which necessitated him coming on a weekly basis for treatment. And eventually, he asked me out. Now, given that I was still married, I should have said no, thank you, but no thank you. But I didn't. And we met up for a drink, and it was exciting. There wasn't anything naughty involved because, you know, didn't have the capabilities. But it was still cheating. You know, I was still meeting somebody else. And gradually, bearing in mind this was in the last throes of, well, we'd been to counselling, my husband and I. It was in the death throes of my marriage. I think it just hastened it along, you know, put it out of its misery, took a gun to it and exploded it. I went out with him, but then in the end I said to my husband, I'm sorry, I don't love you anymore and there's no coming back from this, because I'd been saying that for months. But we were still going to counselling. It was too late by the time we went to counselling. I had been saying this actually 4 years. It was getting that way, and once it's gone, there is no point in trying to resuscitate something that is already flatlining. But nevertheless, I should not have met this person. And I do regret that. It makes me feel bad. So we got divorced. For a few months we were sleeping in separate bedrooms, and then eventually we got divorced, and I looked for a flat and I found one. It wasn't terribly expensive, bearing in mind that my husband was fairly well off because of his job. And also that by that time I had sold my little flat and we had put that into our house. So, I had contributed, and I had contributed monetarily from all my podiatry work over the years. So I wasn't a passenger. Plus all the work I'd done, I always felt that I needed to have value. And the only way I could add value was by doing lots of stuff that he would have had to have paid somebody for to earn my way. Except I didn't get the love. Now, I suppose you can't have it all, but actually that was important to me. Anyway, I got a valuation on our house, which was a lot, and he got another valuation which was almost half what somebody had valued it when I asked. And when we got divorced, I said, I don't want you to have to keep me, pay me maintenance for me. I just want to be able to use my surgery, which was in a converted garage in the house. And he said, okay. But he argued the toss over how much he was going to have to pay for Katie's maintenance. I mean, he wanted to know how much her food would cost a week, how much this, how much that. He was, after all, an accountant. But thank goodness my solicitor, lady, she said, no, he can't do that. He has to give X amount and be done with it. You can't go on, how much does a school blouse cost? Well, I'll give you that much plus this much plus that much. He wanted to get it down to the last halfpenny, and she was having none of it. She did question my desire to not have him maintain me. And in retrospect, I think she was probably right. But I didn't think it would be right. So I didn't. And then 2 years later, he sold the house and moved into the house of a friend of mine. Can you see something repeating here? That he had been seeing shortly after I moved out. She swooped in, and yeah, it's almost like history repeating itself, but in a different way. So I did get my flat. I loved it there. And I was still seeing this person. It was almost a platonic, well, it was a platonic relationship because of obvious reasons. But that's another story. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.